The 8th of August 2024, Vintage Tractors. Good morning. Now, the first mode of agricultural traction was the horse. It took an awful lot of land and a lot of labour to get the oats for him and to get the grass and the hay and the good weather to make the hay. There was no silage that time. And if you had a plough, you needed 2 horses. There was a practice in Ireland of neighbours joining in horses, and sometimes one man would feed his horse and the other wouldn't. And that was a problem. But any event, for centuries, nobody realised the potential of coal, and they didn't have the way of manufacturing the steel, and they didn't have the lathes and the milling machines and the machinery necessary to produce the rounded pistons and bore out the cylinders and all of that. So they took a while. But about we know 1829 was the Rainhill trials in England, and where Stephenson's rocket was put to his test, and from that on it was uphill for steam power, and steam trundled ahead then for 100 years roughly 100 years. But by the late 19th century, that's the late 1800s. I hate using centuries because a lot of people get confused. I prefer to use the actual 1800s. We are now in the 21st century, but it's 20 you write down. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the thing about it is that they began to look at this oil. And oil could be pulled out of the ground and it was used to power lamps, and there was whale oil and there was all that. But the oil from the ground could be distilled. It could be put into a fractional distillation process. And so at the very top came off maybe some gas was probably produced. And it just probably let out to the air. And the next thing was petrol, gasoline. And gasoline was only a small part of the distillate. Next after that came the various other oils, including what we would call TVO, paraffin, diesel. Is it that naphtha? Is that what they call it? There's other stuff there. I never saw it. And then you had the heavy remains, and the heavy remains are used for tar for roads, rubber products, plastics, and all of that. And so, as of today, this day now in 2024, all of the oil is used, and all of it drives our economies. Without it, we wouldn't have any of the things we have, because no other fuel is so good at giving such a variety of products. So anyway, the people trying to find ways of avoiding and going away from steam looked at the oil. Now, one of the other uses of steam from coal was electricity generation, and as though it was easy to put a big generator, a big condensing steam boiler and generators on one site, we'll say of a half an acre, you could power the whole city from there, and that's what Edison was doing. So steam was the original way for electricity generation too, and it was also the most efficient. But then they were able to use the remaining oil, the heavy oils, to run the power stations and to run the ships, because it wasn't suitable for other road use and other use. Okay, now with the Greens in power, they're going back to using diesel to drive the power stations and leaving the coal aside, and the diesel is more polluting, or if you could use that word, produces more emissions and does as much degradation as the coal. Moreover, it's competing for transport and farming for the fuel, and that leaves less demand for the rest of the oil. So it's counterproductive, this whole green energy thing. Anyway, I go back to the tractors, and the thing is that, right, they had the petrol. So petrol tractors were made, and there were a good few of those, the little red ones. Is it Framel? Is that the name of it? A good few little ones like that. Cubs, remember there was a Cub tractor. But the oil producers wanted use for their lesser volatile fuels, and what's more, governments placed taxes on petrol or gasoline. For American people, petrol is gasoline, it's the same thing, identical. It's not a bit like it is it. So anyway, to use this TVO, this paraffin was tried in many ways. But to cut to the chase, one of the ways was to start the tractor on petrol, right? And then when it got hot, to turn it over a switch to TVO. Now, there was no tax at all on the TVO, tractor vaporizing oil. And that is the same fuel used in present day jet engines. They're not using paraffin. How I know is I remember the smell of them clearly. And I can find it every time I get off an airplane that's after doing a flight. You can smell it as clear as anything, and it's the same fuel. So the thing about it is that they had to find a ways of doing it. Now, this is a manifold. I don't know what this is of. I'd say it's a tractor or something, but I don't know. It's not any of the, it's not the Ford 9Ns or the Ford 2Ns. This is it here. An old one that I have. It's from my father's time. Laying out in the shed, I just kept it. Now, the first thing is you have an inlet here for the fuel. And that comes down from a tap that can be switched on and off to petrol or TVO. And here you have an adjuster. You see this here? And it's still working. Look at this. Look at this. You could adjust the fuel. What a lovely bit of kit. And then you could drain it. And this was the thing, drain the bowl. Look at that, still working. I haven't touched that in years. Just drain the bowl. So the petrol came in, and it went up through the manifold, and it was drawn into the engine. See, the air went in here. The suction, the vacuum that was created, caused a suction on a jet. There was a jet somewhere here, and let the petrol go up. Okay. Now, with the TVO engine, the manifold, the exhaust went down along here, and it had a plate. So that this air here, this is obviously a petrol type of machine. This inlet air here, and the suction of the petrol went bypassed or went alongside the exhaust. I haven't stated that too well. Essentially, with the TVO engine, the fuel was drawn up out of the jet and up through a very narrow plate where the exhaust gases were going out the other side. It was a plate. It was like this sheet of paper here. It was like a plate. And so they were very close to, but not connected with. And therefore, to start off, you started off cold. Eventually, then the petrol was getting warm with the plate, with the heat exchanger essentially, but it didn't seem to affect it. It didn't fire in the carburetor. The engine would go all day on petrol. I know them. I know that if you're stuck. But the heat exchanger that was in them, the baffle plate, took the exhaust gases out, and this is why many TVO tractors had the exhaust out the back. It was much easier to vent the exhaust pipe out the back because the exhaust gases had to go down past this plate, and then if you had a big turn up, it wasn't so easy. You could just let it on out the back, right? And that's why they were like that in most cases. I think all the Ford 9Ns were like that. So the next vintage you're at, have a look and see where the exhaust pipe goes out. Now, I emphasize again, as far as I can understand, and there's a plate on this which I will look at sometime make a time, but this is a petrol tractor of some kind. It's a 4-cylinder, and it's good example for the TVO. The TVO had a plate here. I don't think this is TVO, because if it was TVO, the exhaust gases would be going down past the inlet fuel coming up. Have I explained that? It's essentially a heat exchanger based on the hot exhaust, and the present turbochargers are based on the exit as well, on the exhaust gases turning the turbo. So it's not the first time these were used. Understand? So then the power was taken off in the piston. So I hope I've explained that. If anyone doesn't quite get it, post underneath. We'll try and get something else on that. Now, the compression ratio for TVO was slightly less. But a big thing as well about those tractors was, they were, as far as I can see, I never knew any of them anyway, were side valve. So when you look down on the piston, you saw something like this. And the valves, the piston was here, those the two valves was here. So you see it there. This was the piston, and there was a little space across here where the valves went. And then you had the plug, the spark plug was somewhere here. See it there, spark plug. And so there's a good deal of space. That wasn't a problem with TVO. That wasn't a problem because it could cope with the extra. It didn't need as high a compression. I don't know why that is. Well, obviously it was a vaporized fuel, and it was already vaporized, so it already, perhaps the bit of air that was in the cylinder already added to the compression didn't really do it much harm. I can't exactly give you the reason. The exhaust valve was always a little bigger than the inlet valve. But remember, with the side valve engine, the valves came up and I would say this is the cylinder head with no head on it. The valves came up and down here, and so you didn't need a rocker arm, you didn't need overhead valves, you didn't need a belt, you didn't need anything that the modern engine uses. The problem is you have more space, and with a modern petrol or diesel engine, the least space the better, and so generally speaking that's the case. And so the overhead valve is the obvious way to go. You have the space there. With the side valve you had you had waste area inside. So out of the yard, lying out in the wet and of no value, would really be scrapped anywhere else, is the cylinder head of one of those type engines. And I'm going to, it's wet, and I'm going to try and lift it up here just to give you a look at it. You see here, see the shape. Now I can't, let's see, can I do it this way? Oh yeah, you see, see here's the plug. Plug hole is where? Is here. Here's the plug hole, right? See it there, it shows the thing through it here. 4 plugs. And then you have you have this hollow here where the valves could come up and down. This was over the, so the piston would be here, like that. And so you had this space. Now I can't honestly tell you what this is of. Now also it bears testimony to the great way they could cast these. And I will be showing you another video where Henry Ford, and he was one who was an absolute genius at this. Now you see the holes here, they're for the water. These holes here are for the bolts down, but these here are for the water jackets to keep it cold, keep it cool. Now it had a, you see the way it was here, it had a water pump on the front, and then this top one here was for some type of pipe or connection. And then you had this run around here to let the water down, and you had the 4 plugs. Now really it's a marvel in engineering. It's a marvel in casting that they were able to get. The whole thing is hollow. Like I can see down in it here. I don't know how they did it, but there seems to be a bolt through it here. But I'll just give you a look in here. See there? Unbelievable bit of technology. So the valves were operated by a camshaft running at half the speed of the engine, and usually the distributor was also run on that very same shaft. So so that all worked out pretty good, and you had the TVO and the petrol for starting. Now with the Ford, I know with the Ford Fergusons and the Ford tractors, they had a tank, and it had a subdivide for the petrol. And they always called it gasoline, and they always called the TVO kerosene. So just in case there's anyone wondering, kerosene was the official name for TVO in America. And I see kerosene on the pumps now in Ireland for home heating oil, and it works my wick heater. And I don't know, is that right? I won't go into it. But in my time it was kerosene, which was TVO, and paraffin, which was paraffin. There were 2 different products. And while that TVO tractor would go on paraffin, it needed a little petrol in it, mixed in it. But the tanks of these tractors were never fully sealed, and I never could fully understand how they managed to solder up the petrol tank and it in the same compartment as the TVO or as the kerosene. And what the reality was, according to the old people, it never worked. the TVO would soak into the petrol and they'd mix. So I don't know how they did it. I threw out an old one years ago and I regret it now. I'd love to know how they managed to do that. How did they solder the inside of the tank? Did they do it and then seal it up, or put in the ends of it and then, or whatever? I don't know. But in any event, it was never a success. And my father used to always have a little bottle, a Baby Power, a whiskey bottle, and he'd have petrol in his pocket. And if it stopped and he had to talk to someone or to some delay, he would not use the petrol in the tank. He would put no petrol in the tank. He would start it with the wee bottle of petrol in the bowl. You could fill the bowl up. Okay. Now this one here does not have a filler hole, which makes me think this is petrol only. Does not have a filler hole. So the Ford Nan and the Ford Ferguson, all of them, the 2, 8 and 9 ends, they all had a little brass fillet you could screw out and a wee breather on it, and you could fill it up and start the tractor, and that was enough then to get it going. You let it run till it was down fairly low, you knew from experience, and then you turned on the TVO, and the first TVO mixed with the petrol, and it gradually brought it up that it was full TVO. Now that's the story about them. Now I'm on 15 minutes there. It never caught on for cars, mainly because I'd say that it was too tricky for drivers. Moreover, the government wanted to collect the revenue from the gasoline or petrol, and the government cooperated then in having the TVO and the fuel tax-free. The Greens, of course, ruined that for us. For years, diesel and paraffin was seen as an essential good. Now they tax it because of their old green nonsense. So that's the story. As I said, Massey Ferguson had a 4-cylinder TVO. So there was lots of these youngsters. I don't know, it was the Rumella's Chamber. I won't say too much because I might be wrong, but definitely that's the history of them. The diesel engine wasn't perfected because Rudolf Diesel was experimenting with it, and none of them could come up with an injector system. So Diesel suspected that if you had a way of getting the diesel in. Now, don't forget, there was already a hot bulb engine which would run on diesel. But the problem was getting the diesel, a tiny measured amount, into the cylinder and getting much higher compression. So those equipments I've shown you there, they would not be strong enough to hold the extra compression of the diesel. And the rings on the pistons wouldn't be powerful enough. So they had to make a much heavier engine, and Rudolf Diesel did a lot of experiment on that, and the poor fella, he fell off a boat. I don't know what it was about. He had awful trouble with his patents, but his name lives on forever at every petrol pump and every filling station and every diesel filling station in the world. Diesel's written down. It's a great accolade for him, and he deserves that. He was a great German engineer and inventor. So it took a good while to get that right. But as soon then as they got it right, and as soon as they were able to make the ordinary modern diesel engine, well then it was lights out for the TVO, and they gradually died out because there was a lot of rooting with them, a lot of messing with them, changing the fuel over. If you left a young lad in the field and he didn't know how to do it, he'd be stuck. You'd be swinging a TVO tractor for 20 hours and it would not start if it wasn't warm. I never saw a blow lamp used to warm them. I never saw that now. No, you use the petrol. Nor did I ever see a gas cylinder used to get them going, which would be another way of doing it if you were stuck. I never saw that. So folks, that's the story. You'd have a threshing mill there out in the country. You'd have a Fordson tractor. That's the green Fordson, the one with the big seat out behind. And it'd be running away there. It'd do you good to look at it. And the smell of the TVO, the smell of the corn being trashed, and the boys smoking pipes, puffing away on the pipes, and the dogs going mad after the rats and the mice in the stack, and then in for the dinner, and the women all glad to prepare a good meal. Oh Lord, it was unbelievably good scene. One of the disadvantages with the rallies at Stradbally and in Minority is that the background noise with music and other tractors damages the sound. You get the smell to a certain extent, but that straw is brought in on a trailer. It's not, you don't get the original smell of the stack where it was, or the rick, or the pike. You don't get that. and you don't get the sound of the combination of either the steam engine with the coal and steam and the corn, and the sound, or the TVO Fortson. You don't get the proper noise. You need silence to hear it properly. You need to hear it. I often remember you go outside, someone be trying. That's a kind of a rough imitation. Nor do you get the smell. You miss those things at minority. If I were running minority, I'd have a period of 15 minutes where everything would be shut down. Everything. All engines would be shut down just about by arrangement, and you'd run the threshing with the two methods, with the steam tractor and the TVO Fordson or other TVO tractor, and have them running one at a time so that you could hear that sound. That sound can't be really noticed or found. Now, some of the vintages in America do have that, and they have no one else there, only the mill, and that's good. You can get those online. Maybe in England there's an odd one as well. I'm only merely telling you what the story is. In Ireland, the Garvey and the Ransom, Sims and Jeffries mills were all, we call them threshing mills or threshing drums. They were mostly wood with a bit of steel lining along the drum. In America, they were made of steel. And another difference in America was, in the English drum, you had to cut the sheaves. I often did it till the welts came up on my hands for 1 6 a day. And I was in one farmer who was fairly tight, and he wouldn't let us use a knife to cut the sheaf. He would if it was a binder. You had to use a knife. But if it was tight by hand, and I often did it, he wouldn't let you use it. You had to undo the tying and put the tying up, head up first, so that when it went into the mill, it thrashed it. He had this idea that the mill didn't properly thrash the tied sheaf, and so I had to pull them out by hand, making it much more difficult. So that was the way. In America, when you threw the sheaf up, irrespective of how it was tied, and I think that hand tying was rare in America, there was knives. Oh, you just threw the sheaf on a plate, face up, and when you did, this knife, and it cut the sheaf along, it cut them. And when the sheaf reached the drum, the tying was cut. And so the string would be in the straw. Do you understand? That was the difference. There were steel drums. I saw some of them out there, didn't know what they were. I was expecting like a Garvey or a Ransom, Sims and Jeffries. But these things were going around, and they were, you put the sheaf on a plate, and it was a conveyor belt, and these knives were whiz, 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 and it tore them apart with great force. And that was, I don't know why we didn't have that in this country. It would have been a good enough idea. I don't know. But what they used was gossoons. That was what I was used for. Sometimes there'd be two of us there, but usually one. You'd have to, the sheaves to be fired in over to your mouth, and you had to hand the back end of it to the miller, and he let it down. And I remember one fella feeding the mill one time, and some straw of barley hit the revolving drum, the revolving beaters, and it ricocheted and went up his nose, and it went way up, and he was like this, and next thing the blood came running down his nose. He was all right. A little pellet of barley. So folks, that's my Tuppence Halfpenny Worth today on the 8th of August. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm only relating my experience for people maybe who never saw this. And if you have any questions underneath, don't be afraid to ask. I'll try and clarify them as good as I can. One of the things I'm doing here is showing you actual bits of it, because there was a good lot of those around. And there's an old thrashing mill here, an old horse thrashing mill, and there was some abuse on man and horse. My God almighty, 2 horses walking around in a circle, and they had to try and use it to thresh, which was it, and it was geared up like it took an awful power. Any event, the thing about it is, the fuels that were used in these were a great labour saver. They allowed people to live their lives with less hardship, and to produce the bread. I mean, the bread and the grain, and they were terrific in that way. Before that, you had to use the flail to wallop it off it. So that's the story, folks. We'll let you go at that, and we'll talk later about something else. Bye bye. Thank you.